Hi, I'm Julianne Hartman, and welcome to Heart to Heart. And today we have part 2 of Dr. Carlos Pacini's Gluten Day. Gluten. Woo. If you could, well, because it's such a bad word these days, you know. We're just going to go over, recap a little bit from the last show, and what foods do we find gluten in?
Okay. Definitely recommend you go back and watch the first episode. But probably first and foremost would be wheat, spelt, kamut, rye, barley, and sometimes oats.
Oh boy. Okay, so what is happening to us? Is it the immune system? Like, what's going on in our body?
Good. Let's talk about that. Again, for simplicity's sake, I'm going to describe this in sort of fun, easy terms. But
like I'm 5.
Okay. So let's just talk a little bit about the immune system. So something gets into the body, a bad thing. And the first thing, these cells called a macrophage, they're like the bullies and they come in and attack. But your B cells are sort of like the tattletales. And they come in and they identify the problem and then they run back and they start creating a lot more tattletales. And then they'll come in and they'll call in the army, excuse me, the T cells, which will come in and hopefully defeat the problem. And then there's another group that tells them to calm down and, okay, we're done and we're over. But what's important about those B cells is that they're the ones that we use as a marker or an indicator of a problem. Because when the body starts creating a lot of these B cells, we'll call them antibodies. They don't actually attack anything, but they can be a good indicator of a problem.
Wow.
Right.
Okay, so how do we stop that? What do we do?
That's when science figures that one out, that'll be really great, because obviously in an autoimmune situation where the body's attacking itself, that's a huge problem. To date, we don't have any really great ways of stopping it, but there are things that we can do to help calm it down, dampen it, slow it down, things like that.
So now, when did this all start happening?
Well, we talked about in the last episode of the fact that looking at blood samples from 50 years ago to now, we know that there is more sensitivity out there. And so why don't we discuss some of the, again, these are hypotheses, but genetically modified foods is something that's suspected. Storage, because a lot of times wheat is harvested and then it's held in silos for long periods of time where problems can occur. Chronic stress, poor nutrition, enzyme deficiencies. I want to talk about one point. It's a process called deamidation. What happens is you've got, well, if you took any chemistry, a lot of things are carbon chains, and there's an amino group. Let's just roll with it. That we're extracting this one piece of chemistry to make the wheat more soluble in water. Because in food processing, they want it to be easy to be able to add milk, to add water so that it mixes and blends well. Well, the problem with that is that that's another area that can create sensitivity. And when I learned about this, it was interesting in my practice that I would have a lot of gluten-sensitive people. They were aware of it, but they could go to Europe and they would eat bread like it was going out of style and have no problems with it. So this deamidation process is something that is occurring a great deal more here, but unfortunately, it sounds like it's picking up in Europe. And again, this is a way that we're taking a natural product and we're modifying it, and the body's not doing well. And I don't want to be a conspiracy theorist about the genetically modified foods, but we're gonna have to take a hard look at that.
Wow, we sure are. Now, so how would, now talk to somebody out there that maybe is living in a town of 1,500 people, don't have a lot of resources, doesn't live in a major city. We just get on the internet and start researching stuff? Because I mean, you obviously, until you have a symptom, you are probably doing fine, until all of a sudden now, wow, something's going on. Doctors can't come up with anything. So that's when you would start looking into this area?
Well, the nice thing about it is that diet-wise, regardless of income, yes, it's definitely a little more expensive to be eating meat and vegetables. The thing about wheats is they're very filling and they're inexpensive, which is why through history it has developed. I mean, if I remember my history correctly, it was very popular to use with the slaves because it was inexpensive and gave nutrition. And so again, it's not to say that it's totally bad, but I think a lot of these factors can be contributing to why people are having trouble with it. So even just starting by moving away from bread and the rye and things like that, that will give you a sense of whether or not you're feeling better. I did mention if you go off gluten and you don't feel well for a few days, stick with it a little bit longer just to make sure, because there can be sort of a withdrawal process that can occur.
Okay.
But you know, in the last show, and we'll put them up again, there are a lot of good resources, so it doesn't always have to be about money, and you know, it's just a matter of some dietary changes.
Okay, well, that's really good information. I mean, because a lot of times we feel like I'm stuck in this situation and can't get out, you know, and you're kind of giving us a little bit of a solution.
Correct. I mean, and that's, again, specifically about wheat. You know, it's interesting to note that we eat about the same amount of sugar in a day that our ancestors ate in a year. So now you can expand it with sweets and things like that. I mean, there are a lot of little dietary changes that you can make that will definitely have a health impact on you. But it's an important thing to remember that if you are gluten sensitive and you are eating gluten, it is not a good thing, because it's pouring the fire on those autoimmune pathways and can really fire up and increase degeneration.
Okay, so are you saying, though, that gluten itself can give you an autoimmune response? Like you didn't have an autoimmune problem already in your body and the gluten now added to it?
I'm suggesting that if you had some autoimmunity going on and you're adding wheat to it, there is a high probability that will make it worse.
Okay, but what if someone doesn't? I mean, so someone has to have an autoimmune problem, correct? Or in order for that gluten to be a problem?
Well, the thing, you know, the nice thing, as I mentioned in the last show, is that there is a blood test that will actually look at over 20 antibodies to see if there is sensitivity.
Oh, okay, I see.
But because of the fact that through research, the amount of sensitivity to gluten is actually increasing, it would be very important information to know so that you could start making some changes, because the body doesn't work as a vacuum. You know, really, there's not just gluten sensitivity most of the time. There's sensitivity here, sensitivity there. Usually it's a complicated web, but to know that gluten will fire up the rest of them, it really makes you want to know. And obviously, if you could do the testing, it's $200-300. That would be great. But if that's not affordable, go off the products and see how you feel.
Right, that's the easiest thing to do.
It's very doable. And the thing is that we don't need as many carbs as we're getting. So, you know, it would be good for you from a dietary standpoint.
You know, I was at the car wash one day, and I was kind of eavesdropping on these teenagers' conversation just to see what they talk about. But this one girl was telling her other friend, hey, you know, I hadn't heard from so-and-so in a long time, and I called, and her mom said that she's curled up in a ball in her bed and can't move. And the doctors didn't know what was going on. In fact, they had released her from the hospital, and she was just home. And then somebody turned her on to, you know, like a homeopathic doctor or something that kind of started looking into other things.
Right.
And got off gluten within 3 days. She was up completely fine. And so that was interesting to hear that, because, you know, we're talking about a young person, you know, that hasn't had a chance to mess her body up as much as we have. You know what I mean? So that was probably one of the first times I ever heard, except for kids that I've heard have had celiac disease. But now that wouldn't be considered a celiac, because celiac is when they have to go to the hospital, right?
Well, here's the thing. There are sensitivities that actually create pathology on the gut. Now, celiac is very specific, where there is a specific gene involved, and there's a degree of degeneration of the gut. But generally, gene specific, you know, that's 12% of the population. There's, you know, other people that fall out of that category that there are some sensitivities is 87% of the population. And so there are people that don't have actual pathology, but it can affect their neurochemistry. It can cause tissue inflammation, antibody reactions, actually degeneration of the brain, problems in the pancreas leading towards diabetes, thyroid, heart, gut. And be an interesting time to talk about leaky gut syndrome. It's interesting because the alternative community has been talking about this for 30, 40 years. Some of the medical community poo-pooing it, but now it has become, I mean, it's known in the literature. So if your gut, basically, let's just think of it as a hairbrush. It's got these things called villi, these cells, and the food particles need to get in between and get absorbed. Well, in a leaky gut situation, those are damaged, So in a sense, the filter is compromised, so food can get in that shouldn't, and the absorption properties of the gut are compromised. And so, there can be an antibody reaction that's leading to that. There can be stress. And this is the thing that's so complicated about healthcare is that sometimes it's gluten, but sometimes it's gluten in brain and gluten in thyroid.
Right,
So whatever practitioner you're working with, the more that they can really try and look at and perceive what's going on with the total body, the better success that they're going to have with you, because it's complicated.
Now, like I said, there might be somebody in a very small town that doesn't have access to, homeopathic doctors or just any alternative doctor. So, we've got the website. At least Carlos could possibly just get back to you and say, okay, where are you at? Maybe you can suggest somebody in their area, or give somebody some advice on where they would find somebody.
We could try. I mean, in the last show and again in this show, we will post some resources. Obviously, for me, I would certainly do the best that I can, but depending on where you are,
right.
Or at least I could give some input on what they sort of want to look for. Because, for example, me as a chiropractor, I'm not typical.
Right.
And so to go to the chiropractor down the street, they may do nothing with nutrition.
Right.
And, so that's the tricky part. And if you are living in a town of 5,000, who knows? You might have an incredible person there.
That's true.
Or not.
Or nobody.
Or nobody.
Well, thank you again for coming on the show, and I know we're going to have you back for other things, and because it's been very, very informative for me too, and for the audience. And that's what my goal is to bring information to you so that we can all have a better, healthier life and just have a wonderful time on this earth,
Absolutely.
And not be full of sickness and disease and discomfort and depression and all this stuff that just starts to pull you down. So we have our foundation scripture today. It's Ezekiel 4:29.
I need these back.
Oh, I'm sorry. Have you found something we can do about that? About that up close stuff? I'm telling you.
Well, there are some classes, but you have to do the exercises.
Oh, okay.
Physician, heal thyself. Now, we're going to be talking about wheat, so I'm going to do a disclaimer here and say that the Bible is clearly talking about wheat in its original and natural form. It reads, "Also, take yourself wheat, barley, beans, lentils, millet, and spelt. Put them into one vessel and make bread of them for yourself."
Interesting. See, the Bible covers everything.
There you go.
Everything. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. And from my heart to yours, this is Julianne Hartman and Dr. Carlos Pacini saying we'll see you soon.